Mic check.
We can hear you.
Your mic works too.
Good evening, everyone. Excuse me. Welcome to North of Falcon 2021. My name is Mark Baltzell. I'm the statewide salmon and steelhead manager for the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Really appreciate you joining us for our discussion tonight. Specifically tonight, we're going to focus on coastal freshwater fisheries as well as Puget Sound recreational fisheries. Just want to go over, since we're in this new kind of Zoom meeting, wanted to go through some logistics and ground rules for tonight's webinar. Again, if you're on a computer, you can turn your camera on and mute or unmute yourself via the control panel on the bottom of your screen. We'll keep folks muted for the better part of our meeting. And then when it's time to take questions, we'll unmute folks, allow for questions and feedback. If you're on the phone tonight, you can unmute yourself by pressing *6 on your phone. When you do want to ask a question, we ask that you raise your hand. There's a feature on the bottom of your control panel. You can also raise your hand by hovering over your face or name on the list of participants. And callers can also raise their hand by dialing *9. We ask that everybody tonight please be respectful of others. Mute your phone line or your computer line when you're not talking. Please try to be tough on the issues and the questions, but not on the people or organizations. Please no personal attacks, insults, or threats. Try to be an active listener. Speak and act with respect. And try to allow for a balance of speaking time amongst everybody with us tonight. And once again, this meeting will be recorded and it will be available on our website to view later. If you have any technical issues during the call, please use the chat button and Leah will attempt to help you through those technical issues. Please refrain from putting questions in the chat as most of our participants tonight will not be able to answer those. Next slide, please. So again, welcome again. We're here tonight to talk about Puget Sound and coastal freshwater recreational fisheries. Next slide, please. So again, my name is Mark Baltzell. We're going to go through a little bit of a forecast review. We're going to talk about some of the coastal forecasts and trends, as well as some opportunities. We're going to go through our management objectives for Chinook and Coho within Puget Sound this year, go through some of the modeling that's been done to date, talk about some of the things that we're considering as we're shaping a recreational fishing package this year. And then, of course, the biggest reason we're here tonight is to take your public comment. I might just take a quick second before I continue in the presentation just to recognize some department staff that are on the line tonight. We have James Losey, our Region 6 Fish Program Manager, who I'm sure you'll be hearing from later. Jake Rice is our Puget Sound Salmon Manager. Kirsten Simonson is our Puget Sound Recreational Fishing Manager. We also have Jenny Whitney. She's our North Coast District Biologist. Derek Dapp is here with our modeling team. Leah Snyder is our hostess with the mostest. She provides a lot of administrative support within the fish program, and we're thankful to have her here. And I believe listening in tonight also is Fish Program Director Kelly Cunningham. So just to give folks a knowledge of who's on the line. Next slide, please. So for those folks who are new, or for those who might be watching this later, the North of Falcon process is a process that we enter into every spring. And it involves us working with the treaty tribes, our co-managers, as well as federal entities and coastal fisheries, and folks within the Columbia River, the treaty tribes and constituents in Oregon and the Columbia River, to craft salmon fisheries throughout the state. This involves many hours with different biologists and scientific staff coming together. We work on forecasts and forecast the abundance of each of these stocks. We go through a process of determining if there's a harvestable surplus through some of our management models we use. From there, we propose fisheries based on those management models, and they guide how we measure whether or not we're staying within our conservation constraints. The next kind of item in here, and it's part of an iterative process, but we model the fisheries. We see where our conservation constraints are. We negotiate with our tribal co-managers and other states for a fair sharing of catch and impacts. And then finally, at the end of this process, we get to what's called the list of agreed fisheries for the ocean, Puget Sound, and Columbia River. And it ends up being our final fishing package for the coming year. Next slide, please. So as part of our setting of salmon seasons, we also have processes that we need to follow under the Administrative Procedures Act as a government entity. This all starts in early January, where we file what's called a CR 101, and that opens up a suite of rules that we use each year to set salmon seasons. The next procedure in the rulemaking process is a filing of a CR 102, and that's essentially proposed changes to any of those rules. In between those two things are what we're doing right now. It's called the North of Falcon process, where we take public comment on proposed fisheries and take feedback on any changes that the public would like to see in those fisheries. As part of the Administrative Procedures Act, we also take written comments and have a public hearing following the North of Falcon process and following that 102 filing. We consider any modifications to the proposed rules, and we try to correct any errors that have been identified since we filed the 102. We then file what's called a CR 103, including a concise explanatory statement. The director signs that, we publish it, and 31 days later, we have official salmon seasons. Next slide, please. At this point, if he's available, I'm going to turn it over to Jake Rice to go over a little bit of our forecast recap for Puget Sound. And I might just pause because I know Jake's trying to balance being a dad, and if I need to just run through this, Jake, that's totally fine too.
Mark, I can take it.
Perfect. Kirsten Simonson, thank you.
So I'm just going to kind of go through, like Mark said, a quick recap of some of the forecasts for this year. So for Puget Sound Chinook, we're looking at stocks being down generally about 20% for natural stocks, and hatchery stocks down about 2% from the recent 10-year average. For Puget Sound Coho, natural stocks are down about 15%, but hatchery stocks are actually up from the 10-year average, which is a good sign. For Puget Sound pink salmon, the forecast is down about 30% from the recent 10-year average. And for chum, natural stocks are down quite a bit, 60%, and hatchery stocks are down 64% from the 10-year average. Next slide. So kind of looking a little bit more in depth at each of these forecasts for different species. For Puget Sound Chinook, for the natural stocks, you can see kind of the overall look here. generally down about 7% overall from last year's numbers that we were looking at. So you can see generally down, except for like the Green River. Next slide, please. So for the hatchery, again, looking at mostly stocks down from previous year, but down about 11% overall for the hatchery stocks. And next slide, moving into coho. So the first thing you'll see here is that there is a lot of green, which kind of would point you to some optimism for coho, which is great, except that keep in mind that for the natural stocks, they're still down about 15% over the 10-year average. However, we are seeing this bit of an uptick from last year, which is a good sign. For hatchery stocks, kind of a mixed bag. Overall, not much difference from last year. So yeah, just kind of some up, some down, generally kind of on par with last year. So for moving into the pink, so this slide kind of shows two different things. We're kind of looking at the actual returns in the figure at the bottom, and then we're also looking at the forecast for 2019 compared to 2021. So the forecasted numbers for 19 were fairly low, and we ended up having a pretty good return. For 2021, we're forecasting to be about 3 million. So, and this is pretty much on par with the actual returns that we saw for 2019. So this is just kind of broken down the pink estimates by actual river. And so you can kind of see how those numbers break out per river basin. So looking at Chum, not too much room for optimism here. We're only estimating about 500,000 fish returning this year, and you can kind of see how these numbers compare to the last several years. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Whitney to talk about more specifically everything that's going on the North Coast.
Hi, everybody. Let's see, for the North Coast forecast this year, in the Hoh, we're expecting about 988 natural spring summer Chinook. That's not very far above the escapement goal of 900. Maybe some opportunity, but not a lot. The fall Chinook forecast is 2,596. Better news there. The escapement goal of 1,200. For the fall coho, we're looking at an ocean forecast of 3,000, just over 3,000. And the escapement goal there is a range of between 2,000 and 5,000. And I just like to point out that's the ocean forecast. The number back to the terminal area will be smaller and will depend on what ocean options are adopted. For the Quileute River, the spring summer natural run is coming in below the escapement goal of 1,200 at 1,146. And the hatchery run 2,575. For fall Chinook, much better story of we're looking at about 8,500 natural forecast with an escapement goal of 3,000. Probably the most difficult one to fish around this year is going to be summer coho, which have an ocean forecast of less than 300 fish, and again less back to the mouth of the river. And that's mixed with a hatchery forecast of about 3,300 or a little more. So that's going to be a challenge. Fall coho is forecast to be 7,500 natural and about 15,000 hatchery. The natural run is going to be, again, that's the ocean forecast. And we're looking, the escapement floor is 6,300. So not a lot of room there. Next slide. The escapement objectives for these stocks are for the Quileute natural summers, 1,200 escapement. For the natural fall Chinook, we're looking at either 3,000 or 60% of the run size, whichever is greater. Hoh natural spring summer Chinook, escapement goal of 900. Or 69% of the run, whichever is greater. Natural falls is 60% harvest rate or 1,200. And for the solduck natural summers, there's not a goal established, but there's some work being done on that. And recent estimates are that it should be somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 to 1,200, 1,300 fish. So with a forecast of less than 300, that is very concerning. Natural fall coho, the escapement goal is the bottom is 6,300 to 15,000, and whole natural coho 2,000 to 5,000. I was just going to show the trends of the ones that are most concerning. The Quileute summer coho. You can see that the forecast of 291 in 2021 is well below the proposed lower escapement goal. So that's going to be a challenge this summer. Next slide. For the Quileute fall, so the 7,546 again, ocean forecast likely coming back to the river will put us close to that floor. So some challenges there. In the next slide, for the Ho spring summer Chinook, the forecast is just above that escapement goal floor. And I guess for that one, you can see that in recent years, we haven't met the escapement goal, kind of hovering around it most years. All right, next slide. Let's see. So just some of the challenges and opportunities we're looking at in the Ho River. We're just looking at 88 fish above the escapement goal 900, so 44 shares split evenly between tribal and state fisheries. For the wild fall Chinook, up to 40% harvest is allowed on that, so we're looking at about 1,000 fish above the escapement goal, so about 500 shares, and that's should allow for a whole fall fishery. The average catch in the last 3 years has been about 200. Wild fall coho, we're looking at a forecast that is above, but not a lot. A lot will depend, I guess, on ocean fisheries and what the terminal run is going to be, but likely not a lot of opportunity there. The 2017 to 19 average catch was about 900 fish. Next slide. For the Quileute, the forecast of 84.90 allows for a 40% exploitation rate. So that's about 1,700 shares, state and tribal. And that average catch 2017 to 19, 546. So should be some opportunity there. However, the wild summer Chinook is below the escapement guideline of 1,200 fish. Hatchery spring Chinook, we're looking at approximately 1,000 fish for state and 1,000 for tribal. And the average harvest in the last 3 years has been about 788. So there should be some room for a hatchery spring fishery. The wild falls, again, are going to be fairly close to the bottom escapement goal. The fishery has taken about 500 fish a year in the last 3 years. Hatchery fall, coho, the ocean forecast of 15,000, less to the terminal run, less marked, but still about 6,000 fish available for harvest, give or take. This is the one, again, we talked about being a major challenge, that the wild summer coho forecast is only less than 300 fish. So I think I already talked about that one a bit. And then mixed in with that on the hatchery summer coho, we're looking at about 3369 is the ocean forecast. So we're looking at, I don't know, somewhere in the vicinity of 1,000 to 1,500 fish. And next slide. these were some of the suggestions we've received so far for coastal freshwater regulations, allowing sockeye retention on the Quileute and Solduck, allowing barbed hooks on the Quileute system, allowing bait on the Solduck and Quileute beginning a little earlier and extending a little later, and allowing fishing from a boat above Morgan's Crossing on the Hoe. So I think that was my last. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. From here, I think I'm going to turn it over to Derek Dapp from our modeling team.
Thanks for that, Mark. And I thought it might be a good idea to start off with going through some of the acronyms that we use in the fishery management world. You can see a whole lot of acronyms in front of you on the screen now. And I think that the very first one I might start off with is an ER. So an ER stands for an exploitation rate. And what it is it's a percent of the adult population of a stock that's being removed by either a fishery or a suite of fisheries. And what we're looking at in front of us here in terms of Puget Sound management is there's different types of ER metrics that we could be looking at. You might notice that some are listed as a total exploitation rate metric, and those represent the cumulative adult removals in all fisheries from Alaska all the way south through California. You might notice that some of these ER metrics are labeled as an SUS ER metric. And what that represents is a Southern US exploitation rate. And that's the cumulative removals from all fisheries south of Canada. You might also notice that there are a few metrics here that are labeled as a PT-SUS rate, and that stands for a pre-terminal SUS exploitation rate. So a pre-terminal Southern US exploitation rate. And that includes all fisheries south of Canada, except those that are freshwater or in the terminal area, which could be the marine area directly adjacent to the river of origin. What I might start off with on Chinook is going over some of the management objectives here, and I've highlighted kind of some of the more important ones that I was hoping to go over for this year particularly. You might notice Skagit, Summer Falls, and Skagit Springs are highlighted here. And the reason why I've highlighted both of those is because both of those stocks are coming in at below their low abundance threshold. You can see that the objectives that we have there are a little bit different than we've had in past years. For the Summer Falls, we have a 17% SUS ER objective. And then for the Skagit Springs, we have a 10.3% SUS ER objective. So just kind of be on the lookout for those two stocks in future slides. Two other stocks for Chinook that I did want to highlight were the Stilaguamish stock and the Midhood Canal stock. These are two stocks that have been kind of constraining stocks to some of our sport fisheries over the past few years. And we can go over more of their modeling results later. What I would mention for Stilaguamish is that for this year, we're going to have a 22% total exploitation rate cap, as well as an 8% unmarked SUS exploitation rate capped and a 12% marked SUS exploitation rate capped. For Midhood Canal, you might notice that it's labeled as to be determined, and we currently are talking with our co-managers about the most appropriate management objective to use for that stock. So I would say be on the lookout for an update on that one in subsequent public meetings. Can I go to the next slide, please? And then as far as Coho go, what we have in front of us, I would highlight kind of one change from last year, which is Stilaguamish. Folks might remember that last year we had a 50% total ER ceiling for Stilaguamish. Or I'm sorry, last year we had a 35%, and this year we have a 50%. Stilaguamish has gone up in abundance tier. However, for Coho, what we'll be paying attention to in future slides, and what I want to draw people's attention to, is that Snohomish escapement. We have an escapement goal there of 55,000 fish, and this year it's coming out at a little bit below that escapement goal. Once again, we'll go into looking at that in some of the future slides where we actually look at the modeling. If we could go to the next slide, please. And as I'm talking about the modeling, here are kind of our first set of results for that. I thought it might be a good idea to go over what we've got in the model right now and what we're missing. So as far as Chinook, we have all forecasts in the model with the exception of those coming from Oregon and Canada. Those will be updated probably in about a week or so. We have all northern fisheries in the model, except those from West Coast Vancouver Island and northern BC, troll and sport. Those will be also updated in about a week or two. We have all of the coastal fisheries in the modeling, with the exception of Grays Harbor and Willapa Bay. And those coastal fisheries are represented by what we call the ocean options coming out of the Pacific Fishery Management Council process. So the ocean options for non-treaty for Chinook right now are 60,000 in the high ocean option, 50,000 in the middle ocean option, and a low ocean option of 0. As far as the treaty options go, 50,000 in the high, 35,000 in the middle, and 0 in the low. There is a second set of treaty options in which it has 35,000 in the high, 25,000 in the middle, and then 0 in the low. These model runs that you're looking at in front of you are updated to have 2021 Puget Sound inputs, the first set of inputs that have been proposed by the co-managers. So with that out of the way as to what's actually in the model, let's look at some of the results. The stocks where we're not meeting our objectives are highlighted here. I might start off with Nisqually and Nooksack Springs. Those are ones where we're not meeting our objectives currently, and those are ones to pay attention to. However, I think that those are less likely to be marine area constrainers than some of the other ones that we're looking at. As I'd mentioned in some of the previous slides, for the 2 Skagit stocks, we're seeing those at below the LAT, and we will be speaking with regional co-managers. You can see that particularly for the summer falls in our initial model runs, we're a little bit off those objectives, quite a ways off. Skagit Springs are also above their objectives. And then once again, I'd mentioned that our most common constrainers for marine area fisheries, at least as far as the last few years go, are Stilaguamish and Midhood Canal. Midhood Canal, I won't speak much to, but you can see what those initial modeling results are coming out as. And then for Stilaguamish, you can see that we're a little bit off of those objectives. The one thing that I would say there is we've been looking at, we have been looking at kind of how many fish would be harvestable if we met our management objectives. And right now we're preliminarily looking at that as being somewhere between 123 and 124 Stilaguamish fish. And then if you split that between the tribes in the state, we were initially targeting about 61 or 62 fish harvested by the non-treaty fleet in our initial modeling. And that's about where we are at right now for those who might have attended earlier meetings. So next slide, please. Touching a little bit on the Coho modeling. So just once again, very, very briefly describing what's actually going into this model. Right now, in these initial modeling exercises for Coho, we have all 2021 forecasts in the model that are coming from the US. We are going to be updating those soon to include updated Canadian forecasts. And likewise, we'll be updating our northern fisheries in the next set of Coho runs. For ocean options in Coho, we're looking at, once again, 3 different options for non-treaty. We're looking at an option of 80,000 fish, 80,000 Coho. We're looking at an option of 90,000 plus 20,000. And what that extra 20,000 represents is that represents an extra 20,000 fish being added to the Area 1 fishery. And then in our low Coho option, we have an option of 0 for non-treaty. The treaty options once again vary, and there are 2 sets of those, but maybe just going through the 5 different options, starting with the highest and then going to the lowest for those treaty options. We have 50,000, 35,000, 16.5 thousand, 10,000, and 0. Just like in Chinook, the 2021 modeling results here do represent, the modeling results here do represent 2021 initially proposed Puget Sound fisheries. Highlighting a few things here, you might notice that in all of our initial model runs, we're above our exploitation rate objectives for Skagit Coho. However, what we're really paying attention to and what we think is probably most likely to be constraining for Coho this year is actually that Snohomish escapement goal. You can see our Snohomish escapement goal is 55,000 fish, and you can see kind of where we're at on our 3 sets of ocean option runs. We're a bit below that, a bit below that goal. Anyway, that's all I really had on the Coho and Chinook modeling. I'll be happy to take questions later, but for now, if I could pass it back to Mark.
Thank you, Derek. So I'll just talk through the stuff on this slide with folks a little bit. For those who have attended previous meetings, we've been talking a lot about these same issues at the previous few meetings. We started this North of Falcon season off at the end of February with our forecast meeting. Then I believe it was just last week, short time ago, where we got together and had our North of Falcon 1 meeting on the 16th of last week. And talk through a lot of these same forecasts and modeling inputs. So a lot of what you're going to hear us talk about tonight is familiar for those of you who have been listening in so far. So one of the biggest constrainers to Puget Sound Chinook fisheries, both in the past couple years and continuing this year, has been, or will continue to be, the Stilaguamish natural stock. It has been a big constrainer and will continue to be at least through this year. So when we were crafting fisheries packages this year, that was really, as Derek just spoke to, we were really keeping that, the conservation of that stock and trying to meet those objectives as we were thinking about fisheries for this year. As Derek noted, we do have some other Chinook stocks that are popping up as stocks of concern. Both of the Skagit spring and summer fall populations are over their management objectives. And then also the Nisqually stock is also over on the most recent management objectives. Those will be ones that we're watching as we move forward through the rest of the preseason and through the modeling process. Derek focused on Snohomish coho issues, which I think is right, but I also don't want to lose sight of the Juan de Fuca natural coho along with the Snohomish stock. I believe it's in rebuilding status, if not still in overfish status. So that's one where we haven't really met the escapement objectives for that natural stock for a number of years. As folks know who've been paying attention since 2015, we've seen quite a downturn in our natural coho stocks. And so, yeah, working hard to try to get them rebounded here. Kirsten also went through our chum forecast for Puget Sound, obviously through North of Falcon policy. The chum are primarily directed towards commercial fisheries. Those are due to be very limited this year, but we also did want to touch, since this is a rec meeting, that we will be preemptively closing certain South Sound natural chum fisheries preemptively in the preseason, just to make sure that we're being conservation minded about those fish. We don't have a big amount of them in our sport fishery, but considering that all of the co-managers at this point are not planning any pre-terminal fisheries in 2021, we thought it was a good move to take with those fish. If we do get in-season indications that the run's coming back a little stronger, those will probably be the first opportunities that we'd open back up. So. Also, since last year, folks will remember that we had to make some tough choices last year about closing winter fisheries, blackmouth opportunities in Puget Sound. We have heard from anglers and constituents since then that returning winter fishing to Puget Sound is a priority. I think we've heard that. I think we've also thought about where we can make inroads with that opportunity while trying not to reduce any summer opportunity. I think we've heard from our public, and we also believe that summer provides a great variety of opportunity for a lot of different anglers. And also just knowing that this summer, for the last bullet, is a summer where we're expecting a decent amount of pinks back to Puget Sound. We want to make sure we're maximizing those summer opportunities for people to get out and enjoy themselves this summer. So with that, I think the next slide just gets into kind of some of the public comment stuff. So I think I'd pause there, and now would be a great time if folks have questions about stuff. We've gone through quite a bit of information here really quick. I might just say that for folks who are interested, our website is full of information. We're going to be updating things tomorrow, I believe, with some updated Puget Sound modeling and season proposals for both marine and freshwater fisheries. So please, folks, check that out. We'll also have online commenting portal where folks can make comments regarding these season proposals. And so please check that out as you are able. As I'm looking at names here, I think the first person I see on the list is Reve O'Leary. I'm allowing you to talk. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was just curious. It seemed like two fairly different presentations in regards to the Puget Sound and the coast. Is there any modeling happening for the coast?
So I'm going to probably turn this over to James or Jenny. I think, Reve, when it comes to those coastal fisheries, what we're really looking at is where the ocean ends up. So as you know, there's a number of different ocean options for both Chinook and Coho right now. And once we start centering in on a singular ocean option, getting down to kind of a singular ocean package, that allows us to then model those inside fisheries based on what that final ocean package is, turns out being in early to mid-April. And if I missed anything there, James or Jenny, please speak up.
Yeah, I thought, can you hear me there, Mark?
Yeah.
Hi, Reve. Yeah, good question there. So I don't think you missed anything, but for folks that are on the coast, it's worth highlighting, and I think Jenny did a good job of highlighting a number of populations or stocks out there on the coast that, we're pretty focused on. One we're really laser focused on, I think, is summer coho and the Quileute. So these are soul duck summer coho. The only summer coho population that I'm aware of on the entire West Coast. So it's one, with numbers less than 300, we're watching really close. One of the tools we're using to, like I say, quote, watch those is information Derek Dapp presented associated with ocean modeling. And while Derek didn't highlight specifically soul duck summer coho, we can look at expectations under those three different ocean options for the number of soul duck summer coho that are going to actually return to the Quileute. So Jenny reported an estimate there that was just under 300, I think 270 something. And that number could fluctuate, not by 100 or 200 fish, but when there's only 270 something, if there's 10 more coming back to the river, that's a big deal in a year like this, where we'd really like to target populations that are doing a little bit better, like spring Chinook, of course, and then those fall Chinook and fall coho populations in the Quileute. So like Mark mentioned, we're sort of on a little bit of a hold pattern for modeling, but we are looking closely at those forecasts. And so the goal here was to highlight the areas we're concerned with.
Thank you, Reve. Next person on my list is Douglas. I've asked you to unmute.
Hey, Mark. Doug St. Denis, Wash State Guides Association and Charter Boat Association, Puget Sound. On the winter fisheries, I guess I wanted some more clarification on that. Is there a possibility we may have more winter opportunities? It just seemed a little vague. I know we're going to have a lot of summer opportunities, but what are you guys thinking in regards to the winter fisheries? I mean, you acknowledge that the public thinks it's a priority, so where are we on that?
Well, what we've looked at so far, Doug, is that I think overall, overall abundances to Puget Sound Chinook are down this year. Mm-hmm. And so when we're thinking about kind of an overall fishing package and priorities and policy direction and those kind of things, it's really kind of hard for us to think about adding on winter opportunity, just in the face of kind of lower abundances throughout Puget Sound. And specifically, those lower abundances are on some of the South Sound hatchery stocks. I think we're looking at it through the lens of trying to add opportunities where we think we can that minimize those impacts on Stilaguamish. Because if we can stay kind of underneath those Stilaguamish and still add some more time out on the water, I think that's where we're doing it. I think right now, as we're looking at the package, I think trying to add time like back in area 7 or area 9 or 6, any of those kind of Central Sound big mixed stock areas, all those areas have really high Stilaguamish impacts, even in the winter time period. So I think as we're looking at the landscape, it would be difficult. Some of the proposals that we heard at our last meeting were thinking about like South Sound area 11. We also heard some proposals for maybe reducing the summer quota a little bit in area 9 to try to make some room for some winter opportunity in 9. I think that's all stuff that we're considering. But I think if we're looking at the landscape, trying to just put broad pieces of time back on the water for the winter seemed really problematic this year.
Okay, Mark, thanks.
Yeah. Looks like Ryan is next in line. Ryan, I've asked you on mute.
Hey, thanks for taking my hand. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what proposed spring Chinook seasons we might have there in the Quileute system? Are we kind of expecting to be back to fishing from boats bait May 1st? And how long would that season last?
Yeah, so Jenny can add on to this if I miss something, Ryan. That's a good question. So again, it's really early, but the major issue we're communicating to our tribal co-managers there are sold duck summer coho. So if you think about, which I know you're extremely familiar with, the current steelhead season, the plan, is to be closed through April. So a season for spring Chinook would start May, move through June. By July, we start to encounter those sold duck summer coho. Again, something I think you're well aware of. And then that run peaks in August. So if we're thinking about tiptoeing around those populations, we're really thinking about July and August and how we can keep impacts low on those fish. So then if we move back to that May-June period, when we're targeting Chinook, we can think about the numbers Jenny laid out. So I'm going to look on my other screen here. And Jenny, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but we're looking at Quileute wild summer Chinook with a 1,200 fish escapement goal and about 1,100 fish, 1146 forecasted to return. So we're under that escapement goal. So if we are out there, we want to have a light touch on those spring Chinook populations. That said, I don't think there's any discussion Jenny and I have had about no fishing from a boat targeting salmon on the coast. And the reason that is, while there is some conservation concerns out there, we don't have great modeling that suggests, no fishing from a boat is going to change performance in any way. It likely would, of course, because we're all familiar now with, how much more challenging it is to encounter fish from a boat, but none of the sort of packages we've loosely thought through include that regulation. So, and then you asked about bait. I might have Jenny help me out there. If we get closer in those Chinook populations to modeling, I could see no bait is, one of those tools that's out there, but I don't think we've got a proposal from folks to have that rule. And, I'm not sure where we'll land there. But interested in your thoughts on it, if you've got an opinion on any of that stuff.
For targeting those hatchery spring Chinook, if we can't use bait, we won't catch any of them. They just don't bite a whole lot else. So that would be pretty devastating for that fishery in particular. But that's great to hear that we can expect to be back to fishing beginning of May.
Well, so let me just pause because, I want to just be really clear. If we can carve out a fishery, agreed to fishery with our tribal co-managers, starting May 1, there would be no expectation that you wouldn't be fishing from your boat.
Yeah.
So the big if there is, if we can carve that fishery out and meet those conservation objectives, then you will be fishing from a boat.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Looks like Sandy Atkinson is next. Go ahead, Sandy.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Sandy Atkinson with the Evergreen Fly Fishing Club, and I wanted to make some comments on the closure of the game fish season for the Stilaguamish River in the summer and the fall. This is the 4th consecutive year for such closures, and we are very concerned that this will become the new normal and the river will never reopen for game fish in the summer and early fall. Now, the closure is intended to protect the Stilly's dwindling run of Chinook salmon. Now, our fly fishing club is as committed to protecting endangered fish runs as you are, but this closure does nothing to protect salmon. In fact, it actually leads to more Chinook being killed for the following 2 reasons. First, when you take law-abiding fishermen off the river, the only people out there are the bad guys, poachers. Fishermen are your eyes and ears on the river. Not only will we quickly report poachers, but we are a deterrent to poaching simply by being out there. With recent yearly wild Chinook escapement of less than 400 fish, any poaching could be devastating to the run. And secondly, you come up with an estimate of 3 Chinook supposedly saved by eliminating this game fish season on the Stilly. Fly fishermen who are fishing for steelhead in the summer and cutthroat trout in the fall using barbless hooks have negligible impact on Chinook. In our club, we have many decades of fly fishing experience on the North Fork Stilly without hooking any mature Chinook. Your model of 3 Chinook impacts is just a guess, since there's no data to back this up. In reality, these 3 fish that are supposedly saved are paper fish. But since the overall Chinook harvest is not reduced, these paper fish are turned into real fish that are killed in the marine fisheries. Now, in summary, of all user groups, it is fishermen who really appreciate the importance of protecting fish runs. If you continue with this ineffective river closure policy, you will alienate an important user group and lose its support. Our fly fishing club and others will gladly participate in creel checks during a summer-fall season to report any encounters with Chinook. Let us know how we can help gather the data needed to get this North Fork Stilly game fish season reopened. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide this input. Thank you.
Well, Sandy, I really appreciate your comments. I'm going to say a few comments here, and then maybe Leah, I'll see if Ed Eliezer, who's our Region 4 Fish Program Manager, wants to hop on and say a couple words. Please, Sandy, know that Ed and I are working with Fish Program leadership to identify money to put boots on the ground to be able to offer that opportunity again. One of the big hang-ups that we've had is we've had the inability to collect that data that you're talking about, that we're really just kind of using conjecture right now with not having a whole lot of on the ground data. Know that Ed and I in the department are committed to getting that data and getting folks back on the water for that opportunity. we've heard you and many others who enjoy that fishing opportunity, that it's a priority. And believe me when I say we haven't lost sight of that. So maybe I'll pause there and see if Ed has anything he wants to add.
Thanks, Mark. And thank you for commenting, Sandy. I think about on the Skagit, what we hear there. And when we have people fishing, a lot of the poaching goes down. And I feel the same way you do on the Stilly. If we had people fishing, we would, probably have less poaching. But we really need to think about those Chinook impacts, and really appreciate what you said about when we have escapements around the 400 level, one fish can be devastating. So wherever we end at the end of the season, I would like to reach out to your group to see if we can integrate you into the creel that we'll be doing. I think that will help with partnerships with the tribe and show that trust, because what you said is exactly right. And really appreciate your comments and time, Sandy. Thank you.
Hey, Mark, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Looks like Brian Finney's next in line. Go ahead, Brian.
Hey, Mark, just briefly as a newcomer to this, these sessions, just to encourage you all to continue having these virtual meetings through Zoom or other forums like this. If it hadn't been for this type of a setup, I would not have been able to attend this type of a meeting. So even though hopefully when COVID recedes, you'll still have this type of virtual environment so we can all kind of participate and listen in. Those are really all I have to say, and keep up the good work.
Really appreciate that feedback, Brian. I will have to say that especially this year, we've seen quite a huge increase in our participation and viewership in these meetings. We've had the opportunity to partner with TVW, and they've managed to broadcast our meetings as well. So we're really appreciative of that. I think there might be an opportunity for a Facebook Live event here in the future. I know Public Affairs is working on those details as well. So really appreciate that feedback, Brian. Looks like next on the list is George Henry. You'll have to unmute yourself.
I did, Mark. Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
We can, George. Go ahead.
I concur with what Sandy said. I am the club president of the Evergreen Fly Fishing Club. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we were formed in 1955 in Everett. Presently, we have over 100 active members. And just to summarize, to amplify what Sandy said, last year was a terrible year for all of us in terms of being outside and having the ability to fish for the COVID epidemic. We hope 2021 is going to be a better year, and we hope that's going to include our ability to fish our home waters, which we include the Stilaguamish. We're asking you to open the Stilly from the mouth to the Swede Heaven Bridge from May 29th through the 30th of November. As you've heard, as fly fishermen, we are catch and release fly fishers. We're on the water. We have eyes and ears. We see what's going on. We record our fish. We take data, and we look out for the safety and the continuing viability of the waters that we fish. If we are out there on the water, as Sandy said, we're your eyes and ears, and we can help report any violations. And we ask you to please consider us. We fish barbless hooks, and we all catch and release. And I thank you for your time.
Needed to remember to unmute myself. Thank you, George. Really appreciate that. Looks like next in line is Tony Baki. Tony, can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me, Mark?
Hi, Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, regarding Baker Lake this year, with the numbers so low, have you got an agreement with the Upper Skagit tribe and the Swinomish tribes not to fish?
So I'll ask Ed if he has any updates, Tony. My last remembrance of where things are is that there was a little bit of harvestable available at the preseason forecast level, and that the tribes were going to put fisheries into place to go after that harvestable share on their side.
Okay. I have one more question for you.
Go ahead, Tony.
Is it true that the treaties, the treaties yesterday, the tribes left the North Falcon meeting? They just walked out. Is that true because of the lockmouth issue?
Tony, as far as any meetings that I have attended this year, it's kind of, we're in this unusual situation because we're all virtual, right? So when you talk about walking out of a meeting, I don't know how you do that virtually. There's been no tribal meetings that I've attended where the tribes have just kind of logged off abruptly or anything like that. There's been no, in the conversations that we've had, both at a big table and on a regional level, our blackmouth fisheries haven't really come up that much this year. Mostly because we haven't, we haven't proposed big, expansive additions to what we had in place last year. So I guess to directly answer your question, no, that never happened.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Looks like next one is Kevin Kelly. Go ahead, Kevin.
Hey, I got a question about Solduck Fall Coho. I fished the Solduck for years, get a lot of fish that aren't marked. I caught one up by the hatchery a number of years ago, talked to the guys working the hatchery, said, yeah, I've been a wild fish, I would have let it go. They laughed and said, there aren't that many wild fish, we aren't marking them all. What percentage of the fall coho on the Solduck are you marking? Are you still running a program where you're tagging a bunch of them?
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Kevin. So I don't have the mark rates, just right here handy, but if you email me, I can get them for you, or Jenny and I can. But my best guess right now is they're above 95% mark rate, like most of our coho hatchery programs, but we should double check that in case something you've heard, is more accurate. In terms of identifying those fish, it's a pretty unique population, number one, in that it's, returns at a unique time and it's really low in number right now, but also in the sense
I'm talking about the falls, not the summers.
Oh, so when you said Solduck Coho, I was thinking of the Solduck Falls.
No,
so
the falls, because you can go through a lot of fish before you find a hatchery fish.
Yeah, the mark rate there is also extremely high, above 95%. And I don't know what the coded wire tag story is there right now. I don't think we coded wire tag fall coho in the Quileute River.
We actually, James, we do now.
Thanks, Jenny. I'll let you take over.
Yeah. So for the hatchery fall program, the forecast is for 15,864 marked and 2,684 unmarked. And that comes from when they release those fish, they have pretty good counts of what's marked and what's unmarked. So there's about well, the 454,940 released marked fall hatchery coho in the Quileute system and 76,982 unmarked.
Okay, that answers that because I was kind of curious what they were still up to, because you go through a lot of fish before you get even close to your limit.
Jenny, could you highlight the coded wire tagging there if you have it handy? Because I know for both the summer coho and the fall coho, there might be a story to tell there.
Let me look that up real quick and I'll bring it back.
Okay, we can circle back, Mark, if that's doable virtually.
We're easy, James.
Thank you.
Next, I see a phone number 360 ending in 739. Think you're unmuted. Looks like you're unmuted, but we don't hear you talking.
There you go. How about that?
Got you now.
Okay, perfect. I had two grandkids running around. I muted my phone as well as being muted. So this is a question on the Stilaguamish situation. It's fairly obvious this river affects a lot of marine areas. Has anybody ever actually sat down and asked the question, whatever we're doing, is it working? Because it's fairly obvious that it's not. I mean, we've made suggestions, stop clipping the fish, because no U.S. fisherman can legally catch the fish, to see if that would help. But at some point, is somebody going to actually sit down and go, hey, whatever we're doing here is not working. We need to come up with a different plan. And my other question is the state partnering with the tribe in this broodstock affair, or is this just a tribal hatchery?
So would you mind repeating the second part or the second question there? I didn't quite catch all of it.
Okay, well, the second part is the state partnering with the tribe in this broodstock operation, or is this just a tribal hatchery that is doing it?
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question. I might turn to Ed for specifics there. I guess where I would go on Stilaguamish is our director, Kelly Susewin, has really recognized this as a bigger problem than just a fisheries or a harvest issue, probably from right when he started with the agency. Right away, Kelly introduced bringing folks from our habitat program to north of Falcon to have discussions with the tribes as we're having fisheries discussions. There's been a whole lot of time and effort to work and partner with our tribal co-managers on the Stilaguamish to get some habitat projects kicked into high gear, to try to look at what we're doing from a hatchery broodstocking program, as well as kind of what our long-term goals are on the Stilaguamish. I will remind folks that what's going on the Stilaguamish, the part of the, they do, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Ed, they do an integrated hatchery broodstock program. And so basically what that means is they're using natural broodstock for their hatchery program. What we do with that hatchery stock is we clip it so they can be caught in northern fisheries. Folks don't always sample and monitor their fisheries in Canada and Alaska like we do down here, where we electronically sample everything. Really, in those northern fisheries, they're looking for a fish with a clip because they know it's a hatchery fish. And so we're, through the Pacific Salmon Treaty, that's an indicator stock. That's a really important one for both the treaty and recovery down here. So that's really kind of the big reason we do that with that stock. And maybe I'll pause and see if Ed has anything he wants to add.
So can I ask a question?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Before you do that. Well, no, it's fairly obvious when you look at it that whatever's going on is not working. I mean, especially in Area 7, our cuts, more draconian every year, and it's always based off of the Stilaguamish fish. This is actually something that we're, a hatchery that they're trying to do a certain thing. If it's not working, somebody's got to be able to step up and say, look, we have to come up with a different plan here, because I said, it's fairly obvious that we got one river dictating, the northern part of the sound for fishing. So, I mean, there's got to be something or a different plan or something to come up to do that, because it just seems a little ridiculous to be dictated by one river that's right now is pretty much a failing system, and it seems to be getting worse every year. So whatever is going on is not working.
Well, I would agree with your statement to a point, but I think all you need to do is look around behind it. There's a whole bunch of other natural stocks, Chinook stocks in Puget Sound that aren't doing that great either. So I think even if you tried to solve the Stilaguamish and do something different, that doesn't mean that there's not 2 or 3 other stocks right behind it that are in just as bad a shape or that we have just as big of concerns with. So I don't think it's just as easy as solving the Stilaguamish problem is going to bring fisheries back. I think it's a longer, broader conversation about lots of things in Puget Sound, not just the Stilaguamish.
Well, I know that. I understand how it's based on most of the seasons being cut on one river, and if the other rivers, and I know a lot of them that you're talking about, the same thing. You got to have the hard conversations and go, listen, whatever we're doing isn't working, so we need to come up with a different plan and try and get some fish out there so that the opportunities are out there for both tribal and non-tribal. Like say, it seems like everybody in the system is failing because everything keeps getting worse. So if we keep doing the same thing every year, it's just crazy. I mean, we have to come up with some different plans or try some different things to try and get the numbers up.
Yeah, thanks for your comments. I'm not so sure that there's this is stuff that we think about all the time in the department and with our co-managers about how to do things different, how to do things better, how to get more fish back. Most of the biologists and managers within the department work really hard to try to think about this stuff and to try to get more fish back each year. There's a lot of things that are beyond our control when it comes to the management of these fish. There's a whole lot of things that are going on in the natural environment that affect what's happening with these fish. And harvest is only a small piece of it. So I think we try to do what we can as managers to make sure we're doing right by the resource and provide you guys as much as the fishing opportunities as we can, and always trying to find that balance, right? It's a delicate balance we try to achieve. I'm going to move on to Tom Freeberg. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you. That was quick. I'm trying to type in my question, but I'll just kind of spit it out there. So I'm going to start with, I'm the secretary of the Evergreen Fly Club, and Sandy and George have already spoken from our group. But I want to remind everybody that, that since the presence of the white guys here about 1880s to 1910 era, our Puget Sound fisheries have just been plummeting. I mean, this is not new news. The implications, I think, going forward, from my point of view, and I'm a member of the Stilaguamish Watershed Council as a Evergreen Fly Club member. The Stilaguamish has been really trying to build more estuaries, put in more space for natural fish, putting in more, woody debris, trying to bring that river back to 100 years ago. But my question kind of goes like this. If they've been doing catch and release since, the 40s or 50s on that river, it's been the North Fork in particular has been a quality river since the days of Zane Grey. And now we're on our 4th year of a sport season being closed. It just doesn't bode well for the future. And I'll be honest and share with personal disclosures from our fly club meetings when these guys have had a whole lot to drink. There's been disclosures that occasionally they will catch a jack fish, a jack salmon, but that's it. This group of fly club fishermen don't catch any salmon for some reason. I've also been on conservation projects during times when there's been emergency closures. There's been people walking down the river fishing, and our club's been on the shores jumping up and down. Get out of there, it's closed. You can't do that right now. So they really work at trying to clean up and protect the fish, protect the hatchery. It's a very important part of it. So my question is, as the tribes and the community go forward and try and build nurseries, which are going to take 10 years to see the impact, why would we want to keep fly fishermen off the river? Thank you.
Well, again, Tom, and I feel like I'm pointing at Edward a lot tonight, so maybe I won't, but we don't want to keep fishermen off the river. We understand your feelings. I mean, we talk to you guys quite a bit. Our biologists hear from you guys. We understand the frustration. Again, as I spoke to earlier, I think one of the challenges that the department has had is that we haven't had the resources to be able to put bodies on the river, maybe from mostly on a creel side, but maybe a little more on an enforcement side too. I think we've got a new captain in Region 4. I know Edward, in his time as program manager, has prioritized getting boots on the ground in the freshwater, and kind of holding our fisheries accountable for gathering that data in season. As I stated earlier, we're committed to getting those boots on the ground, to getting information, to get you back in the river. We know that. We hope that we have the ability to demonstrate that through information sharing with our co-managers. And maybe I'll just pause there and see if Ed has anything he wants to add.
Sure, Mark. Thank you. And thank you, Tom, for your comments. And I just think about hatcheries that I worked at in the past that were built in the 1910 era. They're still raising the same fish that we raised 100 years ago, right? And so something has to change. And I think of the Stille, and we've been taking bigger habitat restoration efforts than we've seen in over 100 years. Think about Lekwe Island and all the riparian protections that we're putting in place. And in my mind, I have hope that these habitat actions are going to help the Chinook turn around, and we could see that signal in the Stilaguamish, because what Mark said, we have constraining stocks in the Snohomish now. We have constraining stocks in the Nooksack, and so with the Stille having such strong habitat restorations happening, my hope is that we'll see a signal soon and get more time on the water. So really appreciate your comments, Tom and Sandy.
Mark, you're muted.
Thank you. I got it. I have to wait for Zoom to tell me I'm muted. Looks like Tony has another hand raised. Tony, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Tony.
I got a question for Edward on the Nooksack River Springs this year and past. last year I observed the Lummi tribe using their tangle-free nets down the lower river, but I noticed that the Nooksack tribe has set gill nets all the way up from Everson, Washington to Nugent Corner and all the way up to the bus barn hole up at Deming. And I was wondering why the Nooksacks are using set gill nets when the Lummi tribes are using these other type of nets. What's going on there? Because the Nooksack tribe last year, they were catching ESA listed spring Chinook that were going up the South Fork. And me and a couple other guys witnesses too what was going on up there. So could Edward reply on that?
Sure, Tony. We had this conversation with the Skagit tribes earlier today, where Sauk, Seattle, they use set nets, and the Swinomish and Upper Skagit, they use drift nets. And the reason why is because the habitat in the river is different. And so higher up in the river, they have to use different gear than they do lower in the river. And so that's the difference there.
Right, but at Nugent Corner, they drift there for coho and chum, and so why can't they do that for spring Chinook when they're doing it for the other species?
That's an interesting question, and I have to look at the regulations of, what type of gear was authorized for those fisheries, Tony.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So this is the fun part of the meeting where nobody else has a hand up and I just start talking. So I want to remind everybody we've got some upcoming meetings. We've got a Puget Sound recreational fisheries discussion again this Thursday. We're going to be focusing on some Puget Sound, more the freshwater fisheries kind of in the North and South Sound. As well as kind of Puget Sound rec fisheries. As I stated earlier, we're hoping to have some other modeling and season proposal stuff on the website tomorrow for folks to review before that meeting. And then folks, again, just a reminder, next Wednesday on the 31st of March, we have our North of Falcon 2 meeting. Starts at 9 in the morning. Again, it'll be on Zoom. We'll go over kind of more recent modeling or any more modeling that we've done with our co-managers since then. Start to talk through fisheries proposals as we get closer to shaping a fisheries package for this year. I knew this would happen. So
hey, Mark, I might interrupt you real quick.
Yeah,
just
go ahead,
while
James.
This is fresh on our mind. There was a question earlier about fall coho and the Quileute system and coda wire tag rates. So I don't remember the gentleman that asked that question. I don't remember his name, but we're looking at about a 30% mark rate for coda wire tags. I should say tag rate out of that facility. And then you can also compare that with new coated wire tag program for the hatchery summer sole duck population that we received help funding from the Quileute tribe to try to understand the difference in those run timings, kind of fine tune that. So the question was focused on this idea that we see so many marked fish relative to the unmarked. You're going to see that same thing if you're out there fishing this year when we see a forecast of hatchery fish, ad clipped hatchery fish over 15,000 interspersed among less than 3,000 natural origin. So hope that answers that.
Thanks, James. Dale Dennis, I've allowed you to speak.
Yes, hi Mark.
Good evening.
You can hear me okay?
We can, thank you.
I'm with the Evergreen Fly Fishing Club as well. And I would just want to concur with what Sandy and the rest have said about the Stille. I have fished that river for 45 years or more. And in those 45 plus years, I can only say that I've hooked 2 Jack Chinook And both of those were in the main stem. This fishery is one of the best trout fisheries we have here in the Northwest, well, in this region. And to close it down to sport fishing is well, it's just not right. We get to fish the North Fork from September 15th on. 2 weeks after 15th of September, it's the turbidity and the flows are so high, but because of the rains, we cannot fish. So we get basically a 2-week window the last 4 years to fish this Stillage. If nothing else, can we get it open a little bit earlier? If we can't open it out the first Saturday before Memorial Day, let's get it open a little bit earlier than the 15th of September. Give us an opportunity. Without us on the river, you have no champions. And we're going to lose those champions if we don't have a river to fish. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Dale. Reve, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead.
Thank you. So I know there's, just as kind of a little off topic, but a lot of discussion about needing creel data and creel surveys for fisheries that are kind of on the edge. Has there been anyone looking into some innovative alternatives, maybe some more electronic based surveys happening? I know that I haven't researched it a ton, but Mississippi does a Tails and Scales app. Same date, you have to like close your fishing day every day. So it's real time data. Just wondering if there's anything. I know it's very costly to have creel surveyors out there.
Thanks, Hervé. Maybe I'll talk, and I know James is hot on this topic as well. I think we're always looking for new tools to do stuff. And I know James does, and Ed does, and I do. We've got a lot of big ideas about how we'd like things to go and the direction we'd like things to go in. One of the things that we've talked about internally and is somewhere on our priority list in the fish program, I'd have to think about where, is basically an electronic license and catch record card app, where you could have your fishing license on your phone or mobile device. You could record your catch right there if you're fishing for salmon or steelhead or halibut, and all that would be tied to your license, and it would all be pretty slick and convenient, and it would allow us to get some pretty quick and timely data that we don't currently have access to for quite a bit of time using the old system. So that's one. I think there's a lot of challenges internally to get there. I know we put in for some funding, or I think we're thinking about putting in for some funding with that. I'd have to refresh my memory about where things have been there. But currently in our marine programs, especially on the Puget Sound side and the ocean side, we're currently using electronic data capture for all our creeling work. As we move into these freshwater systems, I know that, if we get boots on the ground, that's what we'd like to do is put an iPad in their hands to collect data, so we have some really timely information. So maybe I'll pause there. I see James has got his camera on, so.
Yeah, Rebe, thanks for bringing up kind of these creative alternatives. And we've been trying to dig into them too. The first thing I'd say is I'd really highlight our current system for catch record card data. In places we've had creel and overlapped with catch record card data, we've seen pretty strong validation for our catch record card information. And if you look kind of across the globe, it's a really cool system that seems to work really well. That said, all about this, I think, is that there's about a 1.5 year lag with those data. So when we see changes like increased effort, we don't capture those until a 1.5 years later. So for electronic data collection, all the things Mark talked about to get the catch record card data to us quicker would be really nice. And then also have Creole folks with electronic information. But one step further, I think, is where you're going is we actually have sport anglers, enter, kind of novel information in real time that we're receiving. And it's similar to what we're asking the guide community to do. And so hopefully we continue to see sort of increased effort in electronic guide logbooks, because that's going to be a pretty unique tool, super informative. The last thing I'd say that I think is even closer to what you're suggesting is we would really like to, test out this maybe an online app. So you get home from fishing and you enter your information online. There's all these biases associated with them, like the biggest one being that when people don't catch fish, they often won't report the zeros because they're not as fun to report. When you catch 10 or 12 fish, you're pretty excited to run home and tell folks about them. But we control for some of that bias in our catch record card data. So we're testing out some online platforms like that in local lakes in South Puget Sound for opening day of trout season this year. So these are less critical in terms of our conservation objectives. So we can test them out, see how closely that electronic platform overlaps with our Creole data in the lakes. And maybe we'll learn about that. So all that being said, it'd be nice to stay in touch on this with other things you've read about. And then when we do that lake work, I'd love to just share it with you and show you what we learned and see if it's what you were thinking or if there's tweaks to it. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Looks like Brian Finney is next with his hand up. Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks, Mark. Wasn't want to raise my hand, which you guys are just talking about it. It's interesting. I was just speaking with my person I'm very close with, who runs AWS for government in the state of Washington, and they were just talking about an app like that where a recreation fisherman could take a photo of the fish that they just caught, and they can geolocate where that fish was caught, what it is, identify it, and be a pretty streamlined process to get all that data back to you rapidly. Maybe I'll have them reach back out to you and maybe help support that pilot. But that wasn't why I raised my hand. I was looking at your calendar here, and as I mentioned before, I'm relatively new to this process of listening in on these forums. You mentioned that there's some the tribal or co-manager conversations or talks going on right now. Looking at your public meetings, those aren't available for public viewing or participation or kind of listening in on those talks, right? As something that's new, I don't know what that protocol is there for the tribal talks.
Yeah, Brian, and welcome. It's been a point of contention amongst a lot of people for a long time. Essentially, the way the co-manager meetings are run, the tribes consider it more of a government to government kind of meeting. The representatives of WDFW are representing the state of Washington. And so in general, that's how the tribes things. So no, they're not available to the public. We do try to kind of characterize those conversations as best we can coming out of them. We try to represent tribal viewpoints so folks can understand some of the things that they're telling us and their points of view. We don't often capture that on paper, but we will talk about it. In the past, we have had other observers as part of the process. Sometimes we have fish and wildlife commissioners that are able to join our meetings. And sometimes in the past, we've often had, not often, but we have had the opportunity to have other fishing advisors, people from the recreational community or the commercial fishing community join those meetings and observe. That hasn't happened for a long time. The tribes have objected to us doing that I want to say in the last 4 or 5 years. I might take this opportunity to put in a plug. I believe next Wednesday the 31st in the later afternoon, I think after 3. We're going to be having a plenary session with our tribal co-managers. I think we're still trying to nail down the exact details on that, but I would expect an announcement to come out in the next day or two on that. About a finalized detailed plan. So I would encourage folks to join that meeting. It would be your opportunity to kind of ask questions of tribal leadership in a situation quite like this. I think the plan is to talk about, some of the challenges that we're all facing together in fisheries and fisheries management around salmon. So please, folks, stay tuned for that one. So. Looks like John Townsel is the next person. Go ahead, John.
Yes, I'm John Townsel. I'm also with the Evergreen Fly Fishing Club. And I just want to mention that I've been fishing the Stilaguamish for over 50 years. And the last few years has really been a headache for everybody, because I'm not sure that the Department of Fish and Wildlife really appreciates the fact that when you shut down the seasons year after year and the real sportsmen don't really believe in what you're saying about it, that you're really losing a valuable resource that could be your back. And to emphasize what people are saying, the fly fishermen, which is the active fishing gear, the fly fishermen aren't catching nor harassing the salmon. You're trying to protect the salmon. They're not harassing them or catching them, but you can't overemphasize, they are your eyes and ears on the ground. And surely any of you that have been around for a while know the words Darrington snaggers. Well, we may have a new generation of them, but there's always them out there. And believe me, people yelling at somebody as they're coming in with some obvious snagging gear can have a big effect on it. And as you mentioned, just a few fish can make a lot of difference. And in the scheme of things, and so just a few fish saved can make a big difference. And then to add to what Dale Dennis said, I don't think anybody's thought about this timing on the seasons because of when the rains come in the fall. They historically do come about 2 weeks after the opener. And in effect, if a person can't get out in those first 2 weeks, they just can't get out and go fishing because obviously the turbidity and everything, the water goes against it. So I really think that you should think long and hard about this, that it's kind of a no-brainer. You gain a lot and you don't lose anything. And so I think you really ought to think about that as far as allowing a fly fishing season on the stream up there, or to be specific selective fishing, I guess we'd call it. So it doesn't seem like it's only fly fishing, but I don't think you realize that year after year, just keep telling somebody, well, maybe next year. After a while, people just get tired, they fall out, they drop back, their enthusiasm wanes. So all I can ask is that you guys on the ground think some more about this and keep it forefront in everything that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Appreciate your comments. Looks like Robert Kratzer is next on the list.
Thanks, Mark. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, thank you very much for letting us talk today. Couple of things about the coastal fisheries. Couple of things I know that Jenny had posted on one of the slides with some of the recommendations that people have sent in. One was concerning barbs during the salmon seasons, and prior to 2016 or 2017, we were able to fish barbs out on the coast for the whole season. In 2016, we actually had a North Coast Advisory Group put together. And it was really to talk about our wild steelhead populations throughout the wintertime. And at that point in time, we agreed to go to no barbs for our winter steelhead seasons. And it went from no barbs for our winter steelhead season to no barbs year round. And so I don't know how it went from just our winter steelhead season to the whole entire season. So I would just encourage those guys to look at that a little bit. When we're fishing for our salmon, a lot of times we're harvesting those fish. We're predominantly catching them and going. So it'd be a lot nicer if we had barbs where we could actually just catch our fish and leave for the when we are harvesting them. And then the no fishing from a floating device rule that was also posted on there for the Ho reaches, that rule was also in place, supposed to be to protect wild steelhead during the winter time, and somehow it got implemented for all year around. And so I would also encourage us to look at that particular rule. It allows us to fish summer run steelhead and dollies and cutthroat and stuff like that, where we always have, and it's not protecting winter steelhead in the summertime, because obviously they're not there. I would do that, and then also on our coastal fisheries, as we get tighter, a couple of things I would, as we have some constraints, obviously for us out here, if we could lower our limits before we do a closure, that would be optimal for spreading out pressure and allowing us to fish. That would be good. And then the other part is when we have these low numbers of cohos and we're worried about the cohos, and the fact that we're not allowing the harvest on those, which I agree with when we have low numbers. One of the drawbacks to that is when we post numbers of higher Chinook numbers, it kind of starts forcing people to really hammer on the Chinook. And one of the drawbacks to that is that you have too many people that start hammering on Chinook, and they'll sit in holes and they'll hammer on Chinooks for hours upon hours upon hours, catching and releasing them with the idea of like, we can kill one, but we can still fish because we can kill a coho. And so I don't have any recommendations or suggestions to somehow put a message out there that, catch and releasing those Chinook, time after time after time, and just gobs of them sitting in those deep holes is not really a good recommended practice. And I don't know if for Chinooks, it can be a one and done thing, or I'm not really sure how to approach that, but it is something that's probably taking effect out here a little bit on our Chinooks when we have low forecasted coho numbers. So just some of my thoughts. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate your comments. Let's see, going down here. Art Tatchell.
You got me?
Gotcha, Art. Welcome.
Hey, hi. How you doing, everyone? Thank you very much. Appreciate all the information and all the hard work you guys do. On the real-time creel checks a little bit earlier, there was a little discussion. Just a reminder, we did do a program down in Marine Area 11 with Dan Stevenson, which went pretty good. We had a group of regular fishermen that fished quite often, and they were able to, through a program that was set up, enter their information daily. And just like to say that went real smooth, I thought, and got some good information out of it. So it can be done. Hopefully this year, there was a couple hiccups this year, it'll go a lot smoother yet. And it was kind of a fun thing to do, to tell you the truth. That's it.
Appreciate that plug, Art. What Art's talking about is folks may know if you've fished salmon in Puget Sound for a long time, the sampling program has employed a voluntary trip program or a salmon trip report program. We use that information quite extensively throughout our fisheries and monitoring programs to help inform us as we go through the season, to try to understand what anglers are catching out there, mostly species composition kind of stuff, size and mark status of the fish. So thanks for that plug, Art. Really appreciate it. Looks like there is a 360 number ending in 342. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I've got a question about the North Fork Nooksack spring Chinook season. Are you guys planning on maybe having another 30-day season on that 5-mile stretch below the hatchery?
So I may turn to Ed really quick, but my recollection is that our initial proposal is yes, same as last year, but I believe we've proposed a few extra days on the front end to try to get in the water prior to Memorial Day weekend. Did I get that right, Ed?
You did, Mark, and thanks. I just also, we're not done with North of Falcon yet. And so as we shape the ocean and Puget Sound, that fishery could look a little bit differently depending on how many wild fish are coming back to the Nooksack. But as of right now, the proposal on the table in front of the tribes is extending that season a little bit, and the tribes are, right behind us. So looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is my first time participating, and I will be participating in the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. Looks like Tony's got another question. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, it's a question for Edward. I learned a few things today about the Nooksack coho last year. I guess there was a few fish that came in that were in the river there the last 2 weeks of August, and they made it up to the South Fork, and it was closed, of course, for us for Rex. And I was wondering if it's possible to open Nooksack River for coho this year, let's say right around August 20th, so we have some opportunity to catch those South Fork hatchery fish that I guess are plentiful.
Thanks for your comment, Tony. We'll look into that, and I'll follow up with you personally about your other question. So thank you.
So Bob Kratzer, did you still have your hand up? Is that a second hand for you? Or leftover?
Yeah, thanks. I do have one extra, just actually more of a comment. Oregon's been doing the electronic punch cards as an option for the last, I know for sure 2 years. I think actually 3 years now, you've been able to do an electronic punch card there. I wonder if Washington were go to the electronic punch cards, if they could also go to a voluntary electronic catch and release part on there also for the people who wanted to share that information. I know it's somewhat arbitrary. A lot of guys aren't going to do that, but there's going to be plenty enough people that would like to do it. I remember back in my youth, we had all of our punch cards had your caught fish on one side and your caught and release fish on the other side. And we went away from that. I don't know how many years ago, but a long time ago. But I wonder if we were going to electronic punch cards, which would give you real-time data on catches, if you could also do a catch and release part. And there's going to be a fair amount of people, I think, that would participate. So it's more of just a comment. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Tom, I see your hand up again. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to respond to that last gentleman that that would provide very good evidence for the fly fishing point of view that we don't catch the wrong kind of fish. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Looks like Mark has his hand up. Go ahead, Mark.
Yes, I'm curious about the Stille. There's been quite a bit of talk about it, but one thing that I'm not sure has been addressed is I believe the tribes own the hatcheries on the Stille. Why don't we work with the tribes to see if we can't increase the production of those hatcheries, which would hopefully bring more fish back?
Sorry to pick on you again, Ed. I know you're much more familiar with the hatchery programs on the Stilaguamish. Do you think you can respond to that?
Sure. Both the Stilaguamish and the Department of Fish and Wildlife have hatcheries on the Stille, and we support each other, and we raise some of the fish and release some of the fish from our White Horse facility. And so we are in talks, all the time, not all the time, but, throughout the year on our hatchery production and looking ways to improve it. Right now, we're not having any conversations about increasing those numbers. It's more of a quality of the fish and looking at the system as a whole to see if it could handle more hatchery fish. And so more of a habitat evaluation is where the conversations are at now. And once we understand the habitat better, what it can support, then we can start increasing hatchery production. But as of right now, we're just focusing on the quality of the fish, so we know those natural origin Chinook and the Stilaguamish won't go extinct. And so we're in conservation mode.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tom, did you have your hand up again?
I did, please, one more comment. And Ed referenced the Leckway. I think the Stilaguamish Watershed Council as a group, and in particular the tribes, are really putting their effort into providing a nursery environment for the existing habitat. So it's not a matter of building hatcheries, it's a matter of restoring the natural environment of that river. It used to be a very, very, very productive river until it got turned into a big ditch, a little bit like the Puyallup, where I grew up. So as they start to bring in the estuaries and restore some of those estuaries, I think if you can ask people to hang on for 5 or 10 years, we might see dramatic changes in the natural run. That being said, we got to kind of slow down the fishing out in the Sound. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Looks like Bob Kratzer has his hand up again. Go ahead, Bob.
It's a question for Ed. Ed, so you said you're in conservation mode on those Chinooks and the Stille. Is there, I know on the Cowlitz in the Tilton River and in the upper Cowlitz, they were in the same mode, and they started taking all their hatchery fish and putting them into the Tilton River and letting them spawn in the wild up there to help repopulate the wild population in the Cowlitz. Is there a reason that like, what would be the reasoning for them doing it there, but not necessarily on the Stille? And the reasoning there is they said we could use the hatchery fish because we're in recovery mode, meaning our fish have gone so far down that to recover these fish, we need to really help them. Why would we not use that same approach on the Stille? Thanks.
It's a really good question. The way I think about that is on the Stille, we're dealing with very few natural origin fish in the system. And so typically when we think about, taking brood stock from a system to have an integrated program in the hatcheries, we think about like a 20%. That's like, because we don't want to mine the wild population. And so there's just not that many fish that we could, take additional broodstock from. And so that's really the bottleneck. And that's why I said previously, we're really focusing on the quality of the smolts. So we make sure that they, go to the ocean and come back. Instead of just putting out a whole bunch of fish and then, letting the freshwater environment, those spring floods, wipe them out. And so that's one of the limitations from a hatchery perspective.
Thanks for that, Ed. So again, just a reminder to folks of our meeting next Wednesday. For those who are interested, we don't have it listed here. Tomorrow evening, we'll be having a Zoom meeting going over Gray's Harbor fisheries. So if folks are interested in those fisheries, please join us tomorrow evening at 6. Again, it'll be 6 to 8. Check the website. For those folks who are not familiar with kind of the process, after we go through North of Falcon 2 next week, both with our co-managers and with our public, we'll roll into our the second Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting. It's happening the 6th through the 9th, and then we take the weekend off when we're doing things virtually, and we finish up from the 12th through the 15th, where we hope to get to a singular option of ocean fisheries for both treaty and non-treaty fishers, as well as a final fisheries package for Puget Sound fisheries. Our plan for the PFMC meetings is to have a daily check-in every morning, I believe starting at 8 for kind of Puget Sound and Columbia River stuff. I think as usual during that week, we reserve the 7 o'clock hour to kind of go through ocean fisheries and council business for those folks who need to have check-ins with those council staff beyond salmon, dealing with groundfish issues and whatnot. So that's the plan for those who are interested kind of going forward. I see Gabe Miller with his hand up. Go ahead, Gabe.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Question on Mark Stilaguamish fish. Is there a reason that the Stilaguamish tribe can't adipose and ventral clip fit their fish so we could release those marked fish here in Puget Sound, but they'd still get checked for coated wire tags in northern fisheries?
I might see if Ed has an answer. I guess my quick answer to that, Gabe, is we do have a lower survival rate on those fish when we do vent clipping. I think one of the other issues that we have that we've seen, at least in our fisheries, and I'm not sure about the northern fisheries, is often people haven't been trained or have that knowledge base to look for that ventral clip. So oftentimes those fish get past kind of the sampling and monitoring efforts. Ed, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, you summed it up pretty well, Mark. I also think of just the performance issue. I always kind of cringe from a culturist perspective when we're messing with fins. I mean, the salmon evolved for a certain reason, and cutting them off feels a little bit, wrong to me, so it's a good question, Gabe, and I'll look into it and see, where we've done that and see if it really affects the performance, but it's not something that we typically do in the North Puget Sound.
Okay, thanks. I know they've done it in some of the safe areas down in the Columbia, so that's why I was thinking about. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I know we also tried it with some Coho programs in South Sound too, that we were trying to get some information from, and just it became problematic, and we found coated wire tags much more effective. So, well, don't want to cut folks off. I do want to make sure everybody got to ask a question that they wanted to. Just a reminder again, we'll be back here on Thursday night to go over Puget Sound stuff again, in case folks didn't have enough of us tonight or had additional questions, or for those folks who maybe couldn't attend tonight. I see Sue Kramer with her hand up. I'm not sure if that's Sue or her husband Kurt, but go ahead, Kramer family.
No, it's actually me. And there was a discussion about having fishermen do the electronic card thingies. And that would work if there was not a quota on the fish that they are catching. There would not be an incentive for those fishermen to record those fish. I'm a Puget Sound sampler, and sometimes just talking to fishermen, it's like pulling teeth to get the information from them. So I do not know if you would be able to get quality information on a fishery that has a quota, if that makes sense.
It does, Sue, and I think that's something that we'd consider as we were going forward in time and implementing any kind of electronic, data capture where we're relying on kind of a new system. There'd have to be some overlap in testing over time just to ensure that we're staying within those constraints and those obligations that we have for different fisheries and different levels. But yeah, totally appreciate that comment.
Well, one other thing is that the volunteer trip reports, at least the people at Everett, they do not want to take them. So that is another, thing that you want the information from, but the fishermen are really not wanting to do it. So there's that too.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, unfortunately, over time, anglers have equated filling those forms out as either being double counted or whatever mistrust they have with the department that that information's being used against them. If anybody's listening, I can assure you that that's not the case. That we're only trying to collect and use the best information we can to make the best decisions we can for the fish and the resources first. So with that, I might just say a big thank you to Ed and James and Jenny and Kirsten and Derek tonight. Really appreciate all the staff's efforts in putting this information together for folks to understand some of the complexity that we go through, some of the challenges that we have with putting fisheries in place. I really appreciate all the staff's work in getting this stuff together. So a big thank you to you. And again, a big thank you to all I think at peak time tonight, we had over 70 participants in our meeting. So I just want to say thank you to all of our public who joined us tonight. We really appreciate your time and efforts in joining us and giving us your time to let us know your points of view. We appreciate your passion. We appreciate you supporting the department, and just a big thank you to everybody. Please join us again. There'll be plenty of opportunities here in the next few weeks for you to join us and provide us your viewpoints and ask questions as we finish out this salmon process. So thanks again, everybody. Be safe, be good to each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.